If you've been riding long enough, you know this feeling. The moment when something important shifts. Before the headlines catch up. That's where we are right now. Indians' 2026 plans aren't loud, and they're not flashy. But they're creating pressure that Harley-Davidson hasn't faced in decades. Today, we're talking about why Indians' next move could permanently change the balance of power. And what that means for anyone riding, buying, or holding a Harley right now. Stick with me to the end, because it means a lot for your money, your resale, and the next bike you choose to live with. The signal that changed the conversation. It started with small changes that only certain people notice. Dealer ordering patterns shifted. Supplier timelines adjusted. Inventory conversations became shorter and more guarded. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but experienced people recognized the tone immediately. When confidence is strong, nobody whispers. When direction changes, volume drops first. Across multiple regions, long-standing relationships began behaving differently. Some dealers stopped committing early. Others asked questions they had not asked in years. A few suppliers quietly rebalanced expectations, not outwardly, but internally. These were not panic moves. They were positioning moves. The kind that happen before the public story is written, before anyone agrees on what the story even is. What made this moment unsettling was not the size of the shift, it was the consistency. Signals arrived from different corners at roughly the same time. No memo explained it, no announcement framed it. But the message was clear enough to those paying attention. Something had changed direction, and it was not accidental. The most telling detail was what did not happen. There was no immediate correction, no reassurance tour, no firm hand reasserting control. Silence filled the gap. And silence, in this business, is rarely neutral. Silence usually means alignment has already occurred elsewhere. Signals do not appear without intent. They appear when decisions are already in motion. These early signals matter because observers track patterns, not promises. When quiet shifts align across regions, they suggest coordination rather than coincidence. That realization sharpens concern, pulling focus toward intent, timing, and downstream consequences that rarely reverse once momentum begins. And once signals surface, the conversation always changes. When one brand stopped setting the tone, for years one name dictated the rhythm. When it moved, the market adjusted. When it spoke, competitors reacted. That authority was not declared, it was assumed. But authority is fragile. It exists only as long as others accept it without question. The moment that acceptance wavers, the tone changes fast. Recently, the tone shifted. Coverage began framing reactions instead of leadership. Comparisons flipped direction. Instead of others being measured against the benchmark was being measured against alternatives. That subtle reversal matters more than any single review or sales figure. Perception sets momentum long before outcomes become visible. What stood out was not criticism. Criticism has always existed. What stood out was indifference. Stories no longer waited for permission. Analysts stopped hedging language. Conversations moved forward without checking back. That is the quiet moment when influence slips away. Not in a scandal, not in a collapse, but in a loss of centrality. When a brand stops setting the tone, it begins responding to it. Responses arrive late. Explanations replace confidence. Clarifications replace vision. None of this means failure, but it does mean control has weakened. And weakened control invites challengers to stop asking and start acting. Subtle changes deserve attention because markets speak softly before they move loudly. Consistent signals appearing together indicate planning, not accident. Recognizing that pattern forces a reassessment of assumptions, redirecting scrutiny toward decisions already made, and outcomes unfolding beyond public view. This is how narrative power transfers. Not in one dramatic swing, but through accumulated silence and delayed reactions. Because narrative loss always shows up somewhere first. If this breakdown is changing how you see the market, hit like to keep reports coming. Subscribe so you do not miss what unfolds next. A strategy that isn't defensive. Most competition looks familiar. One side releases something, the other counters. Features are compared. Numbers are debated. But occasionally, a strategy appears that does not behave like competition at all. It does not respond directly. It does not argue. It simply advances into space that used to be occupied. This is what made recent moves unsettling. There was no visible sparring, no public rivalry escalation. Instead, positioning shifted quietly. Messaging widened its appeal without attacking anyone directly. Partnerships emphasized long-term presence rather than short-term wins. The tone suggested permanence, not provocation. Replacement strategies do not announce themselves. They avoid confrontation because confrontation implies parity. Instead, they normalize an alternative until comparison feels unnecessary. Over time, the question changes from which is better to which feels inevitable. That transition is subtle but powerful. What mattered most was patience. Defensive strategies rush. Replacement strategies wait. They assume time is an ally. They invest where others maintain. They speak to audiences others assume are locked in. This approach does not need immediate validation, it only needs consistency. Moments like this reward patience over reaction. Watching how participants adjust behavior reveals more than listening to explanations. When multiple adjustments point the same direction, it confirms movement, prompting evaluation of who benefits, who follows, and who risks losing control. No winners are declared at this stage. None need to be. Intent is enough, and intent always becomes visible through execution. If you're thinking about ownership instead of headlines, the gear and accessories I rely on are in the description. What matters here is what happens next. Why this moment feels structurally different. Every industry goes through cycles, surges, pullbacks, resurgences. Those patterns are familiar. This moment feels different because the usual signals are missing. There is no clear correction forming, no rapid counterweight. Instead, movement continues in one direction, slowly, steadily, without apology. What defines a structural moment is not speed. It is resistance to reversal. Attempts to reassert narrative control do not land the way they once did. Adjustments feel reactive instead of decisive. Meanwhile, alternative paths keep expanding without needing validation. That imbalance creates momentum. Momentum reaches a threshold when opposing actions no longer cancel each other out. Past that point, energy compounds instead of oscillates. Conversations accelerate, expectations reset. People stop waiting for the old center to reestablish itself. They move on. This does not mean collapse. It means redistribution. Influence spreads. Control decentralizes. Once that happens, reclaiming the old position requires more than updates or reminders of history. It requires rebuilding trust at scale, under pressure, while others continue moving forward. Periods of uncertainty demand attention to what changes first, not what is explained later. Early alignment among informed participants signals commitment beneath the surface. Understanding that dynamic reframes expectations, emphasizing trajectories underway rather than reassurances offered after momentum takes hold. That is why this moment does not feel temporary. It feels structural. Because momentum, once established, creates consequences. That cannot be ignored. What sales floors reveal before marketing does. Truth rarely appears in advertisements. It shows up first on the sales floor, in body language, timing, and hesitation. Conversations last longer. Questions change. Buyers linger, then leave, then return with sharper demands. Sales staff adjust their tone. None of this is tracked in press releases, but it defines reality faster than any campaign. Recent floor patterns show a noticeable shift. Buyers are less willing to commit early. They ask about long-term ownership, not just monthly numbers. They compare alternatives without embarrassment. This is not disloyalty, it is calculation. When confidence is high, decisions are fast. When uncertainty creeps in, scrutiny follows. What matters is consistency. These behaviors are not isolated to one region or one season. They appear across multiple markets, quietly, steadily. Sales managers notice it in close rates. Inventory moves differently. Units sit just a little longer. Incentives become conversational instead of exceptional. Marketing always lags behind behavior. It reacts after patterns harden. By the time messaging shifts, buyers have already adjusted expectations. That gap between behavior and branding is where reality lives. Attention belongs on alignment, not announcements. When different actors respond similarly without coordination, it suggests shared understanding. That shared understanding narrows future possibilities, making certain outcomes more probable, while quietly reducing the effectiveness of delayed responses or corrective messaging efforts. Because behavior always changes before pricing does, and pricing changes expose the next layer of truth, the gap between sticker and reality. Sticker prices are comforting. They offer clarity, even when clarity is incomplete. The real number emerges later, after preferences, adjustments, and expectations collide. That final figure tells a more honest story than any advertised starting point. Build-out costs have become the quiet divider. What once felt optional now feels required. Buyers are no longer asking what is included. They are calculating what is missing. The difference between advertised value and delivered value widens with each addition. That gap reshapes perception quickly. What stands out is not that costs exist. Costs have always existed. What stands out is how expected those costs have become. When a base offering no longer reflects how a product is actually purchased, trust erodes. Buyers feel managed instead of served. This changes behavior upstream. People arrive prepared. They budget defensively. They compare outcomes, not promises. When the final number consistently surprises upward, skepticism hardens into caution. Experienced observers look for convergence, not noise. When independent decisions begin to mirror one another, it reflects confidence in a chosen path. Acknowledging that convergence shifts analysis toward long-term implications where small, early moves often compound into decisive advantages later. Cost structures do not just affect wallets. They shape expectations. And expectations determine which brands feel transparent. When expectations reset permanently, premium used to mean extra. Now it means assumed. Features that once justified higher tiers are increasingly treated as baseline. This shift happens quietly, without announcement, but it is permanent once it settles. Buyers no longer praise inclusion. They question absence. When something expected is missing, the reaction is immediate. Not anger, disappointment. Disappointment is harder to reverse because it feels personal. It suggests the brand did not understand the buyer. What drives this reset is exposure. As alternatives normalize higher standards, the reference point moves. The old definition of premium loses relevance. Value becomes comparative, not absolute. Buyers measure experiences, not labels. Once expectations reset, marketing language loses power. Claims sound hollow if they trail reality. Brands that lead expectations rarely need to explain them. Brands that lag must justify them. Change announces itself through behavior before language adjusts. Consistent behavioral shifts across markets reveal intentions that statements may obscure. Recognizing this pattern encourages disciplined observation, helping separate temporary fluctuations from directional moves that carry lasting consequences over time and scale. Expectations do not drift back on their own, they lock in place. And locked expectations expose future pressure points. The absence that matters most. The most revealing proof is often invisible. It lives in what is not shown, not announced, not previewed. Future plans communicate confidence. Silence communicates caution. Pipeline depth matters because it signals belief. When the road ahead looks crowded, investment feels secure. When it looks thin, questions multiply. Buyers may not articulate this directly, but they sense it. So do dealers. So do partners. What makes absence powerful is duration. Short gaps are manageable. Extended gaps invite speculation. Over time, absence becomes narrative. People begin filling it themselves. Moments preceding visible change often feel quiet, even dull. That quiet masks preparation. When preparations appear simultaneously among separate players, it signals resolve. Understanding that resolve helps anticipate developments before they harden into realities difficult to challenge across broader markets. This does not require rumor or exaggeration. It requires patience. As months pass without clarity, assumptions harden. Momentum shifts away from those waiting to explain later. Pipeline gaps never stay hidden. They surface exactly when confidence matters most. Where loyalty actually begins. Loyalty does not start after years of ownership. It starts at the first serious decision. The first time someone chooses a heavyweight machine and commits to living with it. That moment shapes everything that follows. Maintenance habits, brand defense, word of mouth. The beginning matters more than the middle. What has shifted is where that beginning happens. First-time heavyweight buyers are arriving with different expectations. They are informed before they walk in. They compare without hesitation. They ask about ownership experience instead of image. This is not rebellion. It is practicality. Once that first decision is made elsewhere, loyalty compounds away from its former center. Habits form quickly. Riders learn systems. They build trust with service departments. They defend choices socially. Switching later becomes less likely, not because alternatives are bad, but because familiarity takes root. Observation matters most before outcomes crystallize. Tracking early adjustments provides insight unavailable later. When those adjustments align across regions, they reduce uncertainty about direction, encouraging deeper examination of strategic choices, shaping the road ahead over coming years and markets globally. This is how long-term loyalty is seeded. Quietly, early, without drama. Brands that miss this window rarely recover it later through messaging alone. Loyalty only holds if it converts at the start. And when it does not, the fallout travels forward. When identity stops closing deals. Identity has always carried weight. Pride fills gaps where logic hesitates. For decades, that pride shortened conversations and settled decisions. But identity only works when it delivers outcomes that match expectations. Recently, identity has lost its closing power, not because it vanished, but because it stopped answering practical questions. Buyers still respect history. They still appreciate symbolism. But respect does not replace calculation. Pride does not override cost, comfort, or confidence. When identity fails to convert, its role changes. It becomes nostalgia instead of leverage. Nostalgia is powerful emotionally, but weak transactionally. It does not negotiate. It does not justify. It remembers. This shift affects culture first. Conversations soften. Defensiveness rises. Justifications replace certainty. Over time, financial impact follows. Deals take longer. Discounts creep in. Identity still matters, but it no longer decides. Identity loss always shows up financially. Patterns emerge quietly, without ceremony. Individuals closest to operations sense them first. As similar responses surface in different places, confidence grows that movement is deliberate. That confidence reframes expectations, shifting focus from reassurance toward preparedness and long-term strategic planning efforts. And financial pressure forces harder choices. If you want to stay ahead as this story develops, subscribe now. The next explains where this road leads, what decisions follow, and how riders can prepare before consequences settle in and options narrow. Staying informed makes a difference. Stability as a competitive advantage. Passion drives innovation, but stability sustains it. Calm organizations absorb pressure without flinching. They adjust quietly. They communicate consistently. They do not rush to reassure because they are not scrambling to convince. Stability is visible in how decisions are made. Leadership turnover slows. Strategy remains coherent. Investments align with long-term signals instead of short-term noise. None of this excites headlines, but it builds trust across partners and buyers alike. What makes stability a competitive advantage is predictability. Dealers plan better, suppliers commit longer, buyers feel less risk. Emotional attachment matters less when outcomes feel reliable. This does not mean passion disappears. It means passion operates within structure. The result is resilience. While others react, stable organizations continue executing. Stability reveals itself over time, not instantly. Early indicators demand respect because they precede justification. When several actors adjust in parallel, explanations usually follow rather than lead. Recognizing this sequence allows clearer judgment. Concentrating analysis on trajectories forming beneath official narratives across competitive landscapes over extended periods. And its benefits appear most clearly in secondary markets. The market's quiet verdict. Markets speak softly. They do not argue. They reflect confidence after decisions are made. Residual values tell the story last, but they tell it honestly. When confidence is strong, values hold. When doubt spreads, values soften gradually. No announcement explains it. It simply happens. Owners notice first, then buyers, then institutions. This verdict matters because it affects everyone. Trade-ins change. Insurance calculations shift. Financing terms adjust. The impact ripples outward, touching people who never followed the original debate. Once the market settles on a verdict, reversing it takes time. Trust rebuilds slower than it erodes. Confidence returns only after consistency proves itself again. Market verdicts ripple outward. Silence during transition is rarely accidental. It reflects decisions already settled internally. When multiple silences align, they indicate shared confidence. Interpreting that confidence early sharpens awareness, helping anticipate impacts before formal acknowledgement arrives across markets, supply chains, and planning cycles. And they linger long after opinions fade. How the rest of the industry responds. Industries react before they admit change. Competitors rarely announce imitation, but their actions reveal it. Product planning meetings shift. Dealer incentives adjust. Language softens around former leaders and sharpens around emerging benchmarks. None of this appears accidental when viewed together. Across the industry, patterns are aligning. Smaller brands recalibrate pricing bands. Mid-sized players accelerate refresh cycles. Accessory suppliers hedge partnerships. Training programs emphasize different platforms. These moves signal recognition, not panic. Recognition is quieter and more dangerous. Imitation follows advantage because advantage attracts survival instincts. Companies copy what feels safe tomorrow, not what felt dominant yesterday. When a rival's approach becomes the reference point, alignment spreads without coordination. Each actor believes it is acting independently, yet outcomes converge. Executives notice this first through reports, not headlines. Forecasts adjust quietly. Risk committees grow cautious. Capital favors steadier bets. Over time, alignment becomes expectation, and expectation becomes policy, shaping decisions long after the original trigger fades from memory because momentum rewards conformity over extended market cycles without resistance forming. Attention shifts when consistency replaces coincidence. Separate choices, converging signal underlying agreement. That agreement changes risk calculations, making certain paths feel safer. Observers who recognize this early gain perspective, others miss until outcomes become unavoidable across industries, markets, and cycles worldwide. By then, alignment hardens into expectation, alternatives fade, and decisions feel predetermined. Early recognition does not guarantee control, but it allows preparation before momentum locks direction and limits response. Industry reaction follows advantage. When others move, they confirm the direction even without endorsement. And confirmation transforms isolated momentum into shared reality. Structural pressure and survivability. Pressure exposes structure. When margins tighten, survival depends on how systems respond, not slogans. Durable operations flex without breaking. Fragile ones compensate with urgency and noise. Manufacturing resilience is built long before stress arrives. It shows in supplier depth, process redundancy, and cost discipline. When inputs fluctuate, resilient systems absorb shock. Output remains steady. Commitments hold. Confidence persists. What separates durability from fragility is optionality. The ability to slow one area without stalling the whole. The ability to invest selectively instead of broadly. These traits are invisible during expansion and decisive during contraction. As pressure increases, differences compound, lead times diverge, quality variance widens, warranty exposure shifts. Resilient builders protect trust while others negotiate exceptions. The gap becomes measurable. Capital allocation responds quickly to these signals. Financing terms adjust. Expansion pauses. Hiring slows. Decisions prioritize continuity over ambition. Over time, resilient structures earn flexibility, while fragile ones trade future options for short-term relief, locking paths that limit recovery later as divergence compounds during prolonged slowdowns across multiple regions simultaneously once locked. Reversals demand disproportionate effort, and confidence rarely returns on schedule without consistent execution under scrutiny from partners and customers everywhere now. Transitions reveal themselves through repetition of small acts. When similar adjustments repeat independently, they form a pattern. Patterns carry more truth than statements. Recognizing them early encourages disciplined thinking instead of reactive conclusions during uncertain market phases over extended timeframes. Structural pressure reveals survivability, and survivability determines who remains relevant. Why global weight now matters. Global presence changes risk math. When demand spans borders, errors dilute instead of concentrate. International positioning provides insulation that domestic loyalty cannot. Markets differ in timing and tolerance. Downturns arrive unevenly. Regulatory pressure varies by region and cycle. Currency shifts can offset local softness or amplify strength elsewhere. A broad footprint smooths volatility, allowing adjustments without dramatic reversals. When one market slows, another often stabilizes results. That balance protects planning, investment, and confidence. Over time, diversified exposure reduces shock, absorbs mistakes, and preserves flexibility. It allows organizations to learn, adapt, and recover gradually, rather than react abruptly under concentrated pressure when conditions tighten unexpectedly. What global weight protects is learning. Mistakes become manageable when scale absorbs them. Processes improve, offerings refine, confidence rebuilds gradually. This feedback loop favors organizations prepared to operate beyond a single narrative. Domestic focus amplifies swings. Success feels larger, but failure hits harder. Expectations tie tightly to one audience. When sentiment turns, there is nowhere else to lean. Long-term planning benefits most from this reach. Investment horizons extend. Product life cycles stabilize. Shocks become signals instead of crises. Over time, organizations with global weight dictate standards. Others must follow. Even within markets, they do not dominate directly, as influence compounds quietly through procurement, compliance, and distribution channels worldwide. As alignment spreads, deviations feel risky rather than innovative, and perception shapes decisions long after conditions improve. Because history shows scale forgives missteps faster than loyalty alone, especially during prolonged industry transitions, where patience and capital matter more than speed or noise. Before momentum becomes obvious, it feels subtle. That subtlety hides commitment. When commitments align among different players, they mark a turning point. Understanding that point clarifies why later reactions struggle to regain influence across competitive environments, industries, markets, cycles worldwide. Scale leads to control. Control reduces vulnerability, and reduced vulnerability extends influence. This was never just about motorcycles. Viewed together, these shifts point beyond products. The contest was never limited to machines or features. It's centered on who guides expectations, absorbs risk, and defines the touring future. Control operates quietly. It appears in standards, availability, and confidence. When riders plan long trips, when dealers commit floor space, when partners invest capacity, control is present. It does not require permission. Looking back, shifts appear obvious. In the moment, they are quiet. Paying attention early requires restraint, patience, and discipline. When early movement aligns broadly, it deserves serious consideration because reversal becomes increasingly difficult once confidence consolidates. That consolidation spreads across markets, partners, institutions, and planning cycles. Over time, momentum hardens into structure. Gradually, options narrow. What once felt flexible becomes fixed. By the time awareness becomes common, influence has already shifted, and recovery demands far greater effort than prevention ever required. Industry cycles will continue, but leadership now depends on architecture, not memory. Adaptation favors those prepared to invest steadily, listen broadly, and act early. Others may endure, but endurance differs from direction. That distinction defines the touring future more than any announcement. It shapes trust, investment, and the willingness to commit long-term. Once recognized, this pattern becomes difficult to unsee. Realization settles in quietly, without celebration or blame. It simply reframes expectations going forward, for riders, dealers, and builders alike. The road continues, but control matters more than ever, especially as conditions tighten again soon. Looking back, shifts appear obvious. In the moment, they are quiet. Paying attention early requires restraint. When early movement aligns broadly, it deserves consideration, because reversal becomes increasingly difficult once confidence consolidates across markets, partners, institutions, over time, gradually everywhere. This was never just about motorcycles. It was about who carries the road forward. Markets don't flip overnight. They drift, then they settle. What we covered today isn't drama, it's direction. I want to hear what you're seeing where you live. Dealer floors, trade-in numbers, conversations with other riders. Drop it in the comments. If this helped cut through the noise, hit like. And if you value straight, no BS rider talk like this, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.